Well, again, we'd like to welcome everyone to the Green Valley congregation this morning. We have a fine Bible-based discourse. It will be given by Brother Elmer Woodley from the Skyline Napa congregation. It's entitled, Fear God and Keep His Commandments.
Well, folks, nice to have everyone out today, and it seems like for me and my wife, it's like coming home, being back over here and visiting and seeing all of you folks, because we're in this area so much, and now we've off the road and settled over into Napa. So this is we can invite you out to our home now. So if you'd like to come over to Skyline, we'd enjoy having you all to come and visit once in a while. So the invitation is open for you to come. To get into our little discussion today dealing with God's laws, when the nation of Israel stood before Mount Sinai, they would receive the law of God. That law would make them stand head and shoulders above anybody else on the face of the earth. Now, it would not give them everlasting life there. It was not the time. But on the other hand, it would make their life longer and more pleasant under the circumstances in which they were living. Now, they learned certain things. Now, here they were moving out through an area. It was a lot of desert area, and you'd have, in some cases, 3 million people. And imagine now, as we think of today, people getting colds, like in our congregations, or getting the flu. Well, if someone got that, it would lay the whole nation of Israel down. You see, so Jehovah introduced a law concerning quarantining, which was a very nice law for them. He had laws that governed everything else. He had laws that governed the matter of how they dealt with one another, husband, wives, and all. They were life-oriented. That made them outstanding, life-oriented. All the nations round about were not life-oriented. We'll come back to that in a minute. But these people were, and it made them live a long time. We think of Moses. Now, Moses, as we know, he didn't go into the Promised Land. We could talk about that. But he didn't go there, but Jehovah allowed him to go up on the top of Mount Pisgah. And it says he looked over into the Promised Land, and it's like a surveyor of the day. See, today, if you bought a piece of property, you buy it by the foot almost, because they take it over and they say, okay, here's where your boundary line is, goes over here and here. And you'd say, yes, that's fine, and shake hands on it and sign it up. But in those days, you went out and you said, I see. And that was the contract. You say, I see what I'm getting. And Moses went up on the mountain, even though he didn't go into the Promised Land. It says his eyes had not grown dim. Jehovah had given him the blessing of living that long, over 100 years, and he saw north, east, south, and west, and he said, I see this land. And that land, he became the one who would possess it and to take it like a father taking his possession of a land for his children. But you see, Moses, like all of these individuals, they were life-oriented people. They wanted to live, and that made them outstanding. Now, just to go the opposite of that, go down like into Egypt. They were death-oriented. From day one in their life, imagine what a discouraging day it would be if every day you went out to the cemetery and looked where you were going to be put. And you gave suggestions on how you were going to be laid down. Now, that would not be an encouraging time. But you see, that's what these people did. Now, we think of one of the kings, Cheops, or Tutankhamun. Both of those individuals, they died young. King Tut died less than 30. See, because they didn't have the law that raised their standard of living as the nation of Israel round about did. See, so we can look at these individuals and see how they lacked that law. Now, you and I recognize the value of it. Open the Bible, if you will, to the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes chapter 13. And I want to draw your attention here to a phrase that's used by Solomon. And chapter 12, verse 13. Ecclesiastes 12, verse 13. He says, the conclusion of the matter, everything having been heard, is fear the true God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole obligation of man. Now let's go back here. He says the conclusion of the matter. Let's say that you're having someone figure up your taxes at the end of the year. And so you've got the bookkeeper, and he says, how much money have you made? And you start saying, well, let's see, I spent this on this. He says, look, I don't want to hear that. What's the bottom line? I don't care how it was spent, where it was spent. I want to know how much money you've got now. How much you start out with? See, that's what he's saying. He says, the end of the matter. I've heard it all. He says, I've seen it. Now, if you want to, he says, if you want to live, fear the true God. Keep his commandments. That's Solomon's bottom line, he says. And that's what you and I recognize, that when it's all said and done, we've heard it all, haven't we? We've seen it, we've heard it as far as the world's concerned. Now, bottom line is, what are you and I going to do if we want to live, be life-oriented, and live in God's new world? That's where it comes down to today. So, now Solomon, when he made this comment, doubtless had got this information from his dad. Now, his father, of course, was an anointed of God. Holy Spirit was involved, his active force, and the same is true with Solomon, of course. But back up here to the book of Psalm 111, verse 10. Psalm 111, verse 10. Now notice what David says. The fear of Jehovah is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Now you can have people today that are professional students. Now, if a person is a professional student, it means that he can go to school all of his life. He said, well, I've got the money. I'm going to be a doctor. And so he goes to school all these years. He becomes a doctor, but he says, I don't like the looks of blood. So he says, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to become an engineer. He can go back to school, becomes an engineer. Well, I don't like that. So then he says, I'd like to be an archaeologist. Well, after he goes through all of this, I don't like to get that dirty. Pretty soon, he's gone through all of his life, and that's all he's done is studied. But has he exercised any form of wisdom? No. Wisdom means the use and putting to use of knowledge. So he hasn't used it all. So here it says now, the fear of Jehovah is the beginning of wisdom. When you and I get to know Jehovah, now we're starting to exercise wisdom. Because we meet people out in the territory that's read this book. Many people we meet have read the book, and they'll quote some of it. But the fact is, they're not exercising wisdom. In many cases, they're not applying the things that they know. And so that's why that you and I, when we read this, and we say, well, I want to have some wisdom, then whatever you have, you don't have to have a lot of information here, but if we just exercise it, it puts us head and shoulders above anybody else. Now, folks, this brings us now to a word. Let's talk about a word here for a few minutes in our discussion. And that word is sovereignty. Sovereignty. And we hear it read, and here it was used, we talk about the sovereign state and so forth. But what does it really mean? Well, in reality, this word means super ruler. It has dealing with reigning, so it's a super rulership. Now, we live here in the sovereign state of California. You go over east of here, and you have the sovereign state of Nevada. North of here, the sovereign state of Oregon. Now, can any of those sovereign states come and make law in the sovereign state of California? No, because this is a sovereign state. It makes its own laws, and it governs its own people. Now, when you and I read in the Bible about the sovereign of the universe, now, can anyone make law? See, that would overshadow or supersede the laws of the sovereign of the universe. The answer is no. See, we see this in the Bible when it talks about Satan, and he tried to make law, and has down through the centuries. But those laws will never, ever overshadow the laws of Jehovah. See, and that's why when we talk here about what is the law of God, see, we recognize his law and we keep his commandments. That's what makes us better, because we're recognizing his sovereignship. Now, how did he get to have sovereignship? Well, if you will, open the Bible now over to the book of Isaiah. Let's analyze Isaiah chapter 48 for just a minute. Isaiah 48, and I want to read with you and analyze here a minute verse 17 and 18. And as we read this, see if you can pick out what gave him sovereignship over us. So, we start here in verse 17. It says, "This is what Jehovah has said, your repurchaser, the Holy One of Israel. I, Jehovah, am your God, the one teaching you to benefit yourself, the one causing you to tread in the way in which you should walk." Now pause there. Now notice two things would give him the right to make law. First of all, he says, I'm your repurchaser. I bought you. He says, I bought you. You don't own yourself. Through the shed blood of Jesus Christ, we were bought, and so we have no ownership of ourselves to make law. Then he says, I'm your God. Godship gives him that superior position, gives him sovereignty. He's God. Then he says that the one causing you to tread in the way in which you should walk. Now, most of us have been at Kingdom Halls virtually all of our lives. I have. Just you grow up cutting your teeth on, being at the Kingdom Hall. Now, if we've been there, read the scriptures, heard comments through the Watchtower magazine, and if we took these things to their biblical limit, have we ever had anything that's been taught to us that would damage us irreparably if we carried it out to its biblical limit? I don't think so. See, that's why he says, I want you to benefit yourself. That's why, like the nation of Israel, I want them to stand head and shoulders above anybody else. And for us today, when you and I live according to Bible standards, you and I are far, far better people than the people we associate with normally. That makes us this way. See, that's what he tells us to do. Now notice 18. It says, oh, if only you would actually pay attention to my commandments, then your peace would become just like a river, and your righteousness like the waves of the sea. Now, Jehovah was telling the nation of Israel, they're at this point, the ones representing them, which was in Jerusalem. Now, it says, I'd be like your river. Could a river flow through Jerusalem? No. It was on top of a mountain, Mount Zion. So he uses that in like a pictorial phrase. You see, like in Babylon now. Babylon, it had a river, and that was its protection. He says, I'll become your river. Well, that river was Babylon's protection. If the Euphrates came down, and Cyrus and Darius, they were engineers. Apparently, one of them was. They went upstream and they knocked out the bank of the river. That river dropped over as it ran over into a lake bed, an old dry lake bed, as we know. And now the river dropped enough that they could slog through the mud and go up, and they took over that city. That's a river ceased to be their protection. Now, Jehovah says, I'm going to be your river. Look this up in the Insight book. And the idea of river, you see, was used down through the times as being a source of protection. So, Jehovah is our protection. He is our river, if we allow that to be. If we read and study and do what he asks us to do. Now, this matter of us getting to know Jehovah in this matter, and allowing him to direct us, we want to find out what his thinking is concerning the system around us and what we're doing. See, do we want to be a part of that, or do we need to shed it? And so let's turn to the book of Daniel now, chapter 2, Daniel 2, and we're going to read verse 44 and a part of 45. And now we're going to read this. We'll pause here and there in 2:44. It says, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. Now, the kingdom here is in the singular. And notice just before that, he says, in the days of those kings. Just hold that in abeyance for a minute. We're going to come back to talk about those kings. So he says, this kingdom will not be brought to ruin, and the kingdom, singular, will not be itself not. The kingdom itself will not be not pass away, pass on any other people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, which of course is in the plural, and it itself will stand to time indefinite. Now pause there. Now you have kingdom singular, which will be a one world government, worldwide, same government, same rulership. Now it says that it's going to take the place of all these kingdoms, which are governments of today. Now, who are these? See, back up at the beginning it says, in the days of those kings. Now, Daniel has just been able to see a dream image, and he's interpreted what each part of it means. The top of it was gold, and then silver, and copper, and all. It comes right on down to the bottom, which was in the feet of molded clay and an iron that would not stick together. That's where we are today, and we see governments and that are at loose ends. But now, he says that in the days of those kings, are they still world powers today? The answer to that is no. But are they still in existence? Oh, absolutely. All of these governments that were in that image, that dream image, are still around. You have Babylon, that's over here in the Iraq-Iran area. You have Greece. We have Egypt. See, all of these here, Rome, still there. They're all members of the UN. So therefore they become, they're entities today that have to be reckoned with. They're not world powers, but they are there. We have, of course, today the last one of these, which will be the Anglo-American dual world power. But he says in the days of those kings, while they're still in existence, he says this God of heaven will set up a kingdom. So the sovereign of the universe has determined to put here a government that will rule all the earth, all the world. Now, notice where it comes from. Verse 45. For as much as you beheld that out of the mountain a stone was cut. Now, mountains in the Bible represent governments. So out of this huge universal government of God, this huge universal sovereignty of God, he says that a stone was cut, not by hands, and that it crushed the iron, the copper, molded clay, silver, and the gold. Says the grand God himself is made known to the king. Now, this stone that was cut out, if we back up in the chapter, it says that it itself becomes a huge mountain and it fills the whole earth. That's the single rulership of God through his son Jesus. And so here you have the universal. Now Jesus becomes a subsidiary rulership here, and it fills the whole earth. That's that one world government that is going to come. So when you and I say, well, what can I do? Then we want to be sure that we're giving allegiance and backing up the kingdom of God today that we're ruling, or that we're under, which would be the rulership of Jesus Christ. We recognize what he's doing. We recognize his position within the congregations. And so we want to be sure that we not only recognize it, but talk about it. Now, there's already rulership. If you and I could pull the curtains back to see the invisible, if we could just open up the curtains and look in here, we would see 144,000 thrones set. And we would have a large, large majority of those thrones already filled. This year soon we'll be having the memorial, and we'll talk a little about how many of those are already full, and there's not many left. See, so this government is already functioning today, and it makes us really appreciate where we are and what we're doing during this period of time. Now, what will this government do that you and I think of governments of man and what they have thought of doing? But here, just an interesting thought, and we've probably read this before in the Does God Care brochure. If you'd like to glance over this later, it's on page 26 and 7. It's just two little paragraphs, but I think it helps us to appreciate the great, the force of Jehovah's government through his Son and what it will do. Notice it says here, God's kingdom rule will undo all the damage done to the human family for the past 6,000 years. It will undo it. See, today, you and I may have a sickness. You go to the doctor, he says, I can cure that. So he says he can cure it. But you're not as good as you were before. See, if you break your leg and he can put a cast on it, well, you can walk around, hobble around a while, and pretty soon that leg is done. You can walk without the cast. But you're not as good as you were before because certain things have taken place there. Now, he says, I'm going to undo that. Now you're going to be better or what you were before. Then he says the joys of that time will far outweigh any of the suffering that people have experienced. Life will not be disturbed by any bad memories of previous suffering. The upbuilding thoughts and activities that will be the everyday life of people will gradually erase the painful memories. I don't care who you are. You've got some bad memories. Even children sometimes have bad memories. But Jehovah says he's going to wipe those out. And so you and I are not going to have bad memories then that during the night we wake up and go into a cold sweat as a result of it. Then he says, so by means of his kingdom, God will completely reverse the bad situation that's lasted so long. Throughout eternity, he will show his great care for us by showering down blessings that will far more than make up for any hurt we've received in our past. The previous troubles we've experienced will fade into dim memory then, if we care to remember them at all. So Jehovah, through his government, is going to bring all this about. And so it's not always easy for us to leave our home, go out and talk to somebody else about it. But the more we put into our heart, the more we read and study and put into our heart, the easier it is for us to strike up a conversation and talk to somebody about this kingdom, this good thing that Jehovah's giving us. You see, that makes us better because we're talking to other people about it. Now, when we talk about this, that means that there's a true worship. So then false religious things and political element, and the third thing that we have seen now within the past year or so, the third element of the human society has reared its head, and that's commerce. See, commerce, the commercial, greedy commercial element. It's reared its head up now, and we're all very much aware of that, with the prices of things going up. And certain companies then, as the price goes up, they say, oh, we're just making, and then they write about all of their increase in their profits at the end of the year. It's absolutely immoral. But that's commerce. Now, we're going to take a minute and talk about the two here, religion and politics, and how they have married themselves and produced a great deal of badness. Turn to Revelation 17. Revelation 17. Let's read here verses 1 and 2. We'll talk about them for just a minute. Now, it says that one of the seven angels that had the seven bowls came and spoke with me, saying, Come, I will show you the judgment upon the great harlot, who sits on many waters. Now pause. Let your eyes drift over to verse 15. It says, And though he says to me, the waters that you saw where the harlot is setting means peoples and crowds, nations and tongues. So today, this harlot, we're going to talk about the harlot, Babylon the Great later. But here it is, this harlot. She sits on many waters, sits on people, has authority and power over people. Now look at verse 2. It says, With whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, whereas those on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So here the kings, and of course the great harlot, obviously they are not of the same gender. So it says that they would, harlot sits on these waters, commit fornication with the kings. Now drop down here to verse 5. And it says, And upon her forehead was named a written mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of the harlots. So this harlot here is Babylon the Great. Now, who is that? Well, most of us know. But you go back to ancient Babylon, when Jehovah confused the language. Off over here is pure worship. That was Noah and his son, particularly Shem. And Shem, as we read in the Bible, lived all the way down, came to the point where Shem outlived Abraham's wife, Sarah. A long time. So all of these individuals here could have associated and recognized pure worship that Jehovah had outlined early on, where all these other individuals, they didn't have pure worship to start with because they violated God's law in building this great tower. When they left there, they could not talk about truth because they didn't have truth. See, they could not practice true religion. They didn't know what it was because they had violated God's laws. So when they left and spread throughout the earth, we have today religions of all kinds. In our special talk here in a few weeks, we're going to have a discussion about that. You've got 32,000 of these splinters throughout the world. Now, how did they all get that way? They all believe basically the same thing. Well, it came from the Tower of Babel. They used different words to describe whatever it was just because of different language. But it's the same thing. But over here now, language was not touched. Noah still spoke the same language, and it was carried on with pure worship down through the centuries, and you and I can connect up with it today. So, what we're seeing here is that religion and politics, they get together and they do some pretty dastardly things. It mentions back up here in verse 2, it says, whereas those on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So, when you have then them getting together, they produce then a bad thing. People who are drunk will do things that they normally would not do, but they come under the influence of alcohol, and then they do some bad things. These individuals here because they had combining the two, religion and politics, the clergy giving some credence to what was being done by the political element, and now it produces something bad. So what you and I want to recognize is that Jehovah still has law today, and we want to abide by that law. Now, as we mentioned a minute ago, we have now it's involved as that of commerce. And we want to be as free from that as it possibly can. And that's why we've been encouraged, keep our lives simple. Keep the life simple. And if we do, then we're not going to be affected so much by what we see happening in the world of commerce today. So, we started our discussion a few minutes ago. We talked about how that we were standing, or the nation of Israel was standing at the foot of Mount Sinai receiving God's law. You and I are in a spiritual way doing the same thing. We receive God's law through our reading and studying of the Bible, and so do that. See, here we are down at the end of the system, and what we need to do is be able to read and study, recognize what God's law is. It will help us to stand head and shoulders above anybody else. It makes us better people. It makes our lives simple, makes us contented with what we've got, and makes us a happy people during this end of the system of things. So we pray that you folks, as well as our own selves over in our congregation, will continue to serve Jehovah and let his laws and his regulations be the things we abide by. And if we do, we're going to see Jehovah's blessings now. The end of the old order of things will come, and his righteous new world very, very close at hand, and we will be able to live through this and see that new world.
Well, thank you very much, Brother Woodley. We certainly appreciate that spiritual discussion, helping us understand our place in God's government and what it will do for us and how it benefits us now.